Hello guys, once again it's Matt, and today we have another video. Thank you all my members, all my patrons, and let's get going. Make sure to subscribe. We're trying to hit 50,000 subscribers until the end of the year, so help me out there, it helps a lot. And make sure to be a member and a patron. So yeah, let's get going. So I already did a special video talking about the history of the MiG-29 and all the variants of it, the main variants. But I'm going to use the Yeffing Gordon's MiG-29 book to actually as a source and a base to actually explain to you why the MiG-29 that we have in game right now, it's not an S variant, okay? It's not the MiG-29S. So let's get going. So in the early, first of all, let's just talk a little bit about the KGB. So all the dates that I'm going to talk about, remember to have a grain of salt with it, because the KGB actually changed all these dates, and they normally for counterintelligence and stuff. So normally you won't be having a perfect date here. They're normally before the date that we officially have, but there isn't an official confirmation of the date. So the dates kind of don't matter. The idea behind a general space on the time frame, it is more likely to be precise. So for example, early 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, okay? Especially because if a war broke out, obviously production can be ramped up and it changes everything, right? So don't matter too much. It doesn't don't get too much into the dates that I'm going to talk about, okay? So with that out of the way, let's talk about the MiG-29. So just a little bit of the history behind it. Initially in the early 80s, so officially it's 1982, but in the early 80s in general, the first flights and stuff were around late 70s and even like 77, 78. But in general, in the early 80s, as I was saying, they made the 912. Okay, so the MiG-29 came along. This was the first production model, and it didn't have any designation apparently, not even the A variant, okay? It's just MiG-29. Sometimes here in the West, we are actually talking about an A variant, but there is generally not an A variant, okay? It's just MiG-29 without designation. So this is the first MiG-29. They englobe a lot of versions. So we have the normal 912, which is the initial MiG-29. We have the export variants of the 912, so the 912A and B, so the A for Warsaw Pact sellers, right, customers, and the 912B for outside the Warsaw Pact customers as well. So for example, Yugoslavia, Syria, Iraq, and other nations, right? So depending on trustworthy of the nation with the USSR, they basically sold the first export, the A, or the second. So the normal 912 is only for Soviet service, the 912A for people that are more trusted, right? So the East Germans, the Warsaw Pact in general. So we had a little bit of a different radar, not by much. This is the version that the East Germans will receive in the game in the future. It's the only version that they ever used. And the G variant was actually upgraded from this version with different radios and an IFF system for NATO standardization, basically, right? And yeah, basically had the same, a little bit of a different IFF and a little bit of a different radar with different radios and stuff. But the aircraft itself was the same, so same engine, same performance. And the 912B was basically that, a little bit tuned down a little bit more. So same aircraft, same engine, same everything, but a little bit less capable against ECM radar and different IFF codes and other minor things like that. So depending on the country, if it gets into the enemy's hand, it doesn't matter too much the really important stuff like radar technology, radios and IFFs and stuff like that. So that was the idea. But shortly after, like at the immediate time the 912 was in service, the Soviets already knew that it had some problems. The main problem was the lack of ECM and the lack of fuel. So the 913 came along. So the 912, 913, these codes, they're internal Mikoyan-Gurevich codes, okay? So the 912 is the first one, and then shortly after entering with the first flight around 1983, 84, the 913 actually came along. So we had a little bit of a bulged spine basically on the back to have more electronics for the ECM and other minor things, and a little bit more fuel, around 400 kilograms of fuel. It's not that much, but it helps a little bit more. You have half a minute more of afterburners, so it doesn't change the whole aircraft, but it does tend to help a little bit depending on the situation, right? Trying to just help a little bit of the aircraft. Obviously, ECM was being used by the Soviets since the 60s, and the 912 not having ECM and having to actually use a pod or something would be just bad. So the 913 just picked that ECM technology and put it internally in the aircraft, okay? So that's the 913. Obviously, we still have the export variants of the 913, the A and the B technically. The B was sold for North Korea, for example, without the ECM. So that could be a very interesting event vehicle or something. But in general, they're basically the same aircraft. So the same radar, the same, power, same everything. That's the version that we have in game, the 913. It is still a MiG-29, not a MiG-29S. It's just MiG-29. It is internally, it has internally a different code for differentiating to the 912 for the 913 because of the different design a little bit. But the aircraft itself was so similar that they remained with the same designation. So it's still technically a MiG-29 without designation, or MiG-29A, some people would say, okay? Like A. So it is the same aircraft. So the A variant of the 912 that we're going to get for the East Germans and the 913 that we have right now for the Soviets, they are the same aircraft, with the 913 having more fuel and an ECM pod in real life, internal ECM pod, right? In game we don't have the ECM, but we will have the extra fuel, okay? So this is it, guys. This is the versions, the normal versions. But then in the mid to late 80s, the 913S and the 912S versions came along. These two versions are the first ones called the MiG-29S. Why they are different? Because they have a different radar. So they have an improved radar with better range, better ECM capabilities, ECCM capabilities, and also a better TWS. Why did they need a new TWS? Because the main objective of the S variant was to integrate on the older built MiG-29s the R-77 that was finishing development in 1987-88. So this is the idea behind the 913S, the 912S. They're all of these earlier variants can be upgraded to the S standard, but they're not the S until they receive the new radar. So right now we have the normal MiG-29. Once in the future we get more advanced aircraft and more advanced radars and maybe Fox 3 missiles and other things like that, we can receive the 913S or the 912S and be a MiG-29S together with the R-77. That's the main thing. It's the same aircraft, different, just a little bit of an improvement on the radar to be able to use the R-77. The 913 was capable technically to use the ER and the R-27ER and ET. Some people say that it doesn't, but it is the same missile and they were being developed together. The idea is that a lot of sources claim that these missiles were introduced in the late 80s or early 90s, but that's just wrong. Most of the official introduction of these missiles say that these missiles were introduced in the mid 80s or even early 80s, with the R-27R and T coming first, and the ER and ET coming later with the Su-27. So it's difficult to find actual good information on this, but the 913 and the 912, the normal versions, they can use the ER and ET. The only main difference between the 913, 912 to the 913S and 912S would be the R-77 and the better radar. That would be it, okay? So in the future, once we get, for example, F-16Cs with a Block 40 or, I don't know, 30, 40 or 50, whatever they want, with the AIM-120, then we can receive the 913S. You know, that would be the most like capable version. The Soviets, this is according to a Soviet source inside the Soviet Union, they normally considered the MiG-29 to be more, especially the S variant, to be more effective than some of the aircraft that we see in the West. So, for example, we see the F-16C. The MiG-29S was estimated to have a 10% better chances than the Lockheed Martin F-16C and the Dassault Rafale in a combat, in a long-range missile duel. This was the Soviet assessment to it, and a 25% better chances against the Gripen and the Mirage 2005. So, they were assessing that these aircraft were capable or even better than these versions of the Western aircraft that we have. So the S variant can only come when we have more advanced Western stuff as well. And I can only agree with that because we really don't need a new MiG-29 right now, right, for the Soviets. So yeah, maybe an upgrade for the normal 913, so we can have just an upgrade that can change the radar and have the addition of the R-77. That would be very interesting to see, so that you don't have to actually research another aircraft to use basically the same one, but with different loadouts. So that would be the better choice in the far future, not right now, obviously, right? So, and obviously later we have other versions, but we're not going to talk about it here. So let's just recap a little bit. 913 version, MiG-29 without designation, we have in game right now. MiG-29S, internal code as the 913S or even the 912S, it's a different upgraded version of the older aircraft. New radar, TWS, with two targets to lock with the TWS to be able to shoot two R-77s at the same time, and obviously the capabilities of the R-77. So the version that we have right now, it's not the S variant. That would be a late 80s version. Okay, guys? Basically, I was clear enough. There's a lot of information in these internal codes. People get crazy about these internal codes. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. We have many other versions like the MiG-29M, the M1, M2, other versions of the S like the SM, SMT, and so on, the SD, the SE, so exported versions of the S. So there's so many variants that can be added in the future that we're not going to talk about it today, but we can see it in the future. The MiG-29 was produced up by a lot of numbers. In around 13 years of production, they made around 1,600 of those. So it's a lot of MiG-29s built, and yeah, it served a very good purpose of point defense close to the airfields. So it was amazing at that, and it was one of the best interceptors at that because of the fast speed and just acceleration and takeoff speed of such an aircraft, together with BVR engagements. Remember, a lot of people tend to say that the MiG-29 is bad at BVR, but obviously if you compare to today's standards or even 90s standards, where the MiG-29s were tested in the 90s, right, against the more modern Western aircraft, of course they will lose, but against these 80s aircraft, they were even better than most. As I said, by Soviet sources, they thought that the only aircraft that can actually beat in the chances of killing in the BVR condition the MiG-29 was the F-15, the Su-27 if he was ever going to face it, just due to the range on the radar. The Tornado can be a very dangerous aircraft because of the range of the Fox Hunter radar. So aircraft like that, they have BVR capability a little bit better, the F-14 obviously. Yes, basically that. But against these other lighter aircraft like the Gripen, the 2000, the F-16, the MiG-29 was, in the Soviet eyes, a little bit better. So yeah, very interesting to see that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Make sure to subscribe. Kind of a long video, sorry, but anyway, make sure to subscribe, and I see you guys on the next one. So bye, guys. See you.